All right, everybody, welcome to the next episode of the MedTech Mentor podcast. Today, I'm joined by Omar Khateeb, host of MedTech's #1 podcast, The State of MedTech, the source of truth for the MedTech industry, bringing you the latest science and business of MedTech through entrepreneurs, investors, and clinicians, as well as Khateeb & Co. And this is where Omar is on a mission to change how MedTech companies sell and market to physicians by using the power of social media. Thank you so much, Omar. I'm really grateful for you to join the show today. How are you?
I'm doing great, Crystal. Thanks for having me on the show. Great podcast name, by the way. Um, yeah, no, I love getting on and doing things like this with peers. So thanks for coming. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming along. I do love a double entendre, a double M. It really kind of rolls off the tongue. So thank you for that. So tell us a little bit about where you're coming from today. I'm in Australia and you are where?
I am an hour north of sunny San Diego, so I'm in Southern California.
Awesome. And that's where you've grown up in medtech, right? Like this is where you've experienced your journey so far through, which we're going to dive into a little bit, but you've always been in the States, right?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Texas. That's where I started my med tech career. But then, hopped around. I was in Florida for a while, then Silicon Valley for a few years, and now in SoCal.
Well, I'm very excited to share you with our Australian and New Zealand network over here. A lot more APAC going on, I guess, on this side of the
I
world.
love
So
I love the Aussies, and I guess is it for New Zealand? Is it the Kiwis? I love those people down there, and I have a percentage of my audience. I think we looked it up like 2 or 3% of them they come out of Australia/New Zealand. So yeah, no, I want to be big in Australia.
fantastic. Well, you want to be big, but also for the travel and the holidays, right? So we'll give you an
Yeah,
excuse to come out
totally,
here.
absolutely, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, as we discussed, our listeners, about 75% of them are in Australia. So I'm really excited to, tap into your network in the States. Obviously, that's where I've come from, but I really kind of found myself in medtech here after I moved. So it'll be a great conversation and nice to expand our networks. So, look, we always like to start off with a bit of context. Give us a bit of background about where you're coming from your experience, and sort of how you got into doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, I was born and raised in Texas, specifically El Paso, Texas, around the U.S. Mexican border. Father was a surgeon growing up. My mother was a professor of anatomy. So, like most people, I became pre med in college, but unlike most people, I actually stuck to it and I went to medical school in Texas. Got accepted, early accepted, and was on a full scholarship. And then about halfway through medical school, I just realized it wasn't for me. And I ended up dropping out around 2011, 2012. And so, um, not knowing what to do, I figured let me just do door to door sales. And so I did door to door sales, which is really difficult and very humbling, and interviewed at a lot of different companies. And a lot of recruiters said that, I wouldn't be able to get into like med device right away. It's definitely not high tech stuff, which I just thought was nonsense. And I was right about it. And I was able to break into devices at the very top in surgical robotics. So I started off at the world's first robotic spine and neurosurgery company, which was Mazor Robotics, which later got acquired by Medtronic. So I started off in sales. And after a year and a half, leadership heard about this young kid in Texas who was really good at marketing. And I was convinced by my mentors back then, Chris Sells, who was the VP of sales back then, and then Chris Prentice, who's the CEO of Mazor Inc. USA, to go into marketing. And so that's what I did. And as I say, the rest is history. When I went to marketing,
Can I ask, what did they say to convince you to go into
oh,
marketing?
that's a great question. Yeah, because like I'll be, very frank. This is how like poorly educated I was about what marketing was back then. Back then, when I thought of marketing, I thought that's what like attractive farmer reps did. Because when I was told about marketing, it was always farmer reps coming doing lunch and learns, and I'm like, I don't want to be a glorified caterer.
Yeah.
And then I learned that you know Chris Prentice was very persuasive in the sense that like he was somebody really well respected in an organization, and he told me I sat in a chair and he's like, look, he's like, if I could have you join us as part of the commercial marketing team here at the headquarters, like I feel like I would have my dream team. And so when you admire and look up to somebody and they say something like that to you, like that's
Yeah.
one thing. But I think the bigger thing was like, he explained, because he was a really well accomplished sales leader. He's like, yeah, it's like the thing with sales is like it gets old after a while. It's like when you go into marketing, it touches every department in the organization. You deal with strategy and you deal with a lot of money. So, like bigger budgets. And then Chris Sells, who was the sales leader, told me, he's like, Omar, he's like, there's thousands of salespeople out there in the world. He's like, use this as an opportunity to come internal to the organization, work with Prentice, learn how the company works, right? Learn how the organization works inside out. And after a couple of years, if you want to come back in sales, you could. And so, of course, these are two men I deeply admired and respected, so I trusted them. And again, this is kind of a good segue for your podcast here, which is like the importance of mentors and mentorship.
100%.
Because had I not had that conversation, I would have, not that there's anything wrong with this, but I would have continued being a rep, and my career path and trajectory wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah, absolutely. They really just unpacked a whole extra, however many levels for you, particularly getting into the strategy, as they said, the sort of investment that comes with new products and, getting involved inside the business, how to make things move. You're going into a completely different toolbox there.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly correct.
Exciting. Okay. So now this is where you moved into marketing, but then you got promoted as well later on in that space, right?
Yeah, I moved up, so over, kind of quickly, I did the blocking and tackling of marketing. I really built my career around like events, so when I was at Missouri, we used to attend like 15, 16 conferences a year. And so I really thought about the strategy around that, the promotion, et cetera. And right around 2015, I've been, so, it's funny. I see on LinkedIn a lot of these like LinkedIn influencers and creators. And I'll tell you, like, I'm an OG on LinkedIn because I was using the platform creating content back in 2015 when like nobody was using it.
Yes.
And so I was following Andrew Chen, who was the VP of growth at Uber. And somewhere around that time, he wrote this article called like the VP of growth is the new VP of marketing. And the whole idea was, how do you use like data and digital to drive adoption? And I remember reading that and thinking like, why don't we do that in medical devices? Like, why are we doing this thing of like, we hire a bunch of salespeople and they hit the streets and stuff? And so from then I kind of started like my crusade around like using social media and digital marketing to drive product adoption and actually be a revenue generating arm of the company. A lot of organizations, because marketing is really product management, they look at marketing as a service organization and as a cost center, not a revenue generator. And so I was really hell bent on changing that narrative. And so, I spent the next like 6-7 years focused on that. I was the first head of growth in our industry. I launched the first podcast in our industry at Potrero Medical. We did a lot of like very unique and different things. And then, after spending some time in different roles, I decided that if I really wanted to make my own dent in the MedTech universe, I had to go out on my own and start my own company. So started my company where we essentially use digital content and social media to attract investors and also drive product adoption and commercial pipeline for MedTech companies. So great example of that is we worked with Moon Surgical, which has been a really hot company lately in the surgical robotics space. But when we worked with them, they did not have a single salesperson or commercial leader for 5 or 6 months that we worked with them as we built out pipeline. So I'm a big believer in using in companies, reallocating budget so that they can have stronger EBITDAs and, more importantly, improve their free cash flow and operating income, and then use that in places where you'll actually find effective marketing. I mean, if you think about any of your listeners or even you, when you went to a trade show, and I mean not a trade show that you're working at, a trade show that like you're attending as an attendee, did you walk through the exhibit hall and look at every single solution and technology and then evaluated it and went home and talked about it? You did it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's just not how buyers work these days. I'm a big fan of exhibits still, but I think that there are more effective ways to invest and market and drive adoption of technology. And that's kind of the genesis of my company, which started with a course, which, by the way, for your listeners who are listening, if anybody's either a sales leader or a rep or somebody who wants to learn how to drive adoption using social media and sell, my flagship course, which really built my business, called the Medical Sales Network Effects Program. We have it's on demand content, so you can watch it, rewatch it as many times as you want. Plus, we have a private group that people can get into. That was in its heyday, it was about $3,500 course. Right now, it's around $2,500. But for your listeners, I have a very special discount, so they can get it 60% off, which means it's going to be under $1,000. They just got to go to digitalmedicalsales.com, use the code podcast 2024, and they'll get 60% off and get like my best content for under $1,000, and also join the private group, which has CEOs, VPs, a lot of people in it.
Excellent. What a fantastic way to dive into this network of yours and learn from these experiences. The thing that was coming to me as you were discussing this was, back in 2015, or, circa before you started Khateeb and Co. So that was 2 years after COVID. But leading up to that, I always found the conversation with MedTech companies around marketing to be really challenging, particularly on social media, because they're so conservative. So I'm so interested to unpack that. And I know our listeners will be as well, as, how you've managed to break through that barrier, that conservative traditionalist barrier, to get these organizations, thinking about the digital transformation the day after tomorrow and how they can take advantage of it too.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, I think the first step is like for me to work with a company, they have to, they don't have to understand everything about it, but they have to be at least consciously aware and believe in it. I do not like if I talk to a CEO or VP of marketing that has any little bit of skepticism, which I don't know how you could these days. I don't even like waste my time on it.
Okay. All right,
You know,
cool. You go, we're not a match. Fair enough. Yep.
yeah, and usually, uh, questions like, well, how many doctors are on social media or on this platform, or how many of them are on here and everything. I mean, it's one thing. It's okay to kind of look into that, but I mean, do they take the same level of scrutiny when they spend like tens of thousands of dollars on a booth? Like, no, they don't.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. Really good point. I actually watched, or no, I'm sorry. I read one of your posts about how many doctors are actually on LinkedIn. It might have been from last year, but I was actually really surprised at the small percentages, but yet how much momentum there is now for all of us, attracting doctors on LinkedIn. But then the percentages are quite small, which then gave me this sense of blue sky. Oh my gosh, just getting started.
Yeah, and it depends on how you cut it. I mean, LinkedIn. I mean, so it depends. Like, let's do a simple one. Give me a specialty.
Orthopedics.
Orthopedic. Okay. So I'm gonna look. I'm using LinkedIn's own Sales Navigator database. So when I look at orthopedic surgeon, okay, and we're just doing sort of a quick count, and we'll look at U.S. just because that's what I'm most familiar with. So look at the United States. Orthopedic surgeons. There's about 16,000 registered on LinkedIn. Okay, which is in line with how many of them are practicing in the U.S. I think total in the U.S. might be 22,000. Right. So 16,000 on there, and then of those 16,000, 654 of them have posted original content. And so a lot of times, what you have to understand is like, okay, well, where is my user going? So even if your end prospect is spending a little bit of time on LinkedIn and logging in a couple times a week, that's enough to at least get some content in front of them. Because what's the other option? It's like, okay, I want to get in their inbox because they check their inbox every single day. Great. You're also competing with a lot more noise and other priorities. So like the chances of them seeing things in there is lower. My organization, we actually do a lot of cold outbound emails because if you know how to tactically structure it right, like you can get emails opened and read and consumed, etc. So it all goes back to this foundation of business of persuasion and how do you get attention. That's
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so valuable right now for reps to have resources like this because the access, and I know you talk about this a lot, is the access is diminished. Gone are the days where we could just kind of walk into the hospital, roam around, check in on that case. That's not the way it works anymore. So actually getting into the door is really hard. So is that what your sales course really breaks down, is how to get that access virtually as well as physically? Is it's all around that
yeah,
influence and
100.
persuasion?
100%. And I think the way that people, I'm a big fan. I mean, look, I'm as digital as it gets, but I still go to conferences or go and try and meet my prospects in person. The problem is that you don't always have that access, and so the idea is like, how do I reach that prospect in multiple ways and stay top of mind? So like, the famous sales figure that I think Johnson did the study on it, which is like you need 7 touch points on a prospect before they move to a next step. Well, you can accomplish with 7 touch points within a week. Like when I was a rep, what I
Yeah.
used to do is, I would use LinkedIn, try and engage them that way. And of course, I would put out my own content, because if the doctor was, let's say, not posting content on LinkedIn, but I saw that maybe they log into LinkedIn and they like some stuff, they'll see my content that way. So that was one way. Then I would message them. That's a second one. Then I'd find, let's say, their Twitter handle or Instagram, maybe like a few of their posts there. And let's just say, for the rep who's like super skeptical, it's like, well, my surgeon, I checked, they don't use Instagram, they don't use Twitter. And there's physicians out there like that. It's like, okay, well then, what kind of emails are you sending them? Because like a lot of sales, like our industry, when it comes to selling, like email is the number one tool, but 99% of our industry doesn't know how to do good value-driven follow-up. Right? Value-driven follow-up isn't sending a brochure and then emailing a week later and saying, hey, just following up on this, circling back, just want to float this up. It's like, how do you find relevant content for that person? Say, hey, like, I found this study, I found this article, I found this thing, I think this is valuable, right?
How do you add
And
value?
finding
Yeah.
ways to get attention and engage people, you know?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and for those, the last thing I'll say, Chris, is like, even sending emails, right? You can send a bunch of emails, even if they don't get opened, right? Your name is still popping up in their inbox. They're seeing a headline there, and that's leaving some kind of an impression, And I think the problem is that people give up too easily. You're not selling like a $10 tchotchkes item, like you're selling a medical device, which requires a lot. It's just a longer sales cycle, which requires a lot more effort. And as Elon Musk says, like you get paid in proportion to the complexity of the problems that you solve. And so, like, the longer sales cycle, the more money you can make. And then, of course, it's hard. It's a lot harder, you know?
Absolutely. You're speaking my language. I definitely think that a lot of times people do give up a little bit too easy. I like to think of it as being pleasantly persistent, And I really love what you're talking about is that you always have to come to with the expectation of adding value. Even if it's in a digital sense, there's something there that leaves them better than you found them. There's something there that they're going to go, oh, actually, yeah. And then the association that you made with all the different touch points and how those are increasing as deals become more complex and systems and structures within organizations as well meet those complexities. So I remember when we did the Challenger sales program, they were saying it was, sort of triplicate of what it used to be to get a deal done. So if you can start kind of wearing away at all of those touch points with these, different channels, different outlets, then you're just kind of knocking off each of those steps in a way, to get closer to that sale and hopefully convert faster.
That's exactly right. And, the thing about it as a rep is that as a rep, you have very little influence on the product. Like, you have zero influence, actually.
Yeah.
The product's not gonna change. But what can is like you. Like, you're part of that product, and there's plenty of physicians. Forget physicians. There's plenty of business people out there that utilize a product that isn't as good as a competitor, but they utilize it because the person who's servicing them, their account executive, whoever it might be, they just like them more. You know, and so I think some of the people who have succeeded the most in my course, started leveraging LinkedIn. They produce content a couple times a week, and that content could be them covering cases, interesting things they read, etc. Because the fact of the matter is that LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. It's not going away anywhere. Um, at least in the United States, more physicians are becoming employees, and so more of them are using LinkedIn for jobs. Plus, a lot of physicians, especially surgeons, know that they're not going to build wealth in their day jobs. Like, it's just not going to happen, you know? And so they look at LinkedIn as an outlet for them to brand themselves and get connected to interesting companies, startups, etc. And so that's where the action is. And so if you want to be a player in the game, like, you have to be on there. Plus, not to mention, as a rep, you're likely not going to stay at your current gig for the next 5 or 10 years. And so the product of you has to constantly be marketed and sold. So one rep who joined my program 2 years ago, I remember she asked me, she's like, hey, like just hypothetically, like what if none of my customers are on LinkedIn? Why should I like go through your course and learn how to do this? I'm like, well, your customer may not be on LinkedIn, right? But other types of customers are, which might be a new opportunity, etc. I was like, so you have to, like to find a new job, you don't start that process when you lose your job. It's like way too late at that point. What you want to be doing, this is where I leveraged LinkedIn a lot, was to constantly be doing thought leadership and putting yourself out there, so that you can be attractive to another company. I mean, just like, imagine that same person. I told her, like, I was like, look, you know, pretend like none of your customers are on LinkedIn. Okay. Just start posting content about, the company, the problem you solve, all these different things, because then another company's gonna be like, man, XYZ is great. Like, we should hire this person. Why don't we hire her?
Yep.
And that's happened to multiple students in my program. I think probably the best part of my program is that while yeah, people do, depending on who you talk to, get like really remarkable results on the sales side. I think if anything, my program has become like an accelerator for people to like job hop and find better opportunities. Because that's the one thing I've noticed, that people coming into my program, they're coming in as like, as a rep or a manager, and then like they've jumped to, like, I had one person who came in my program as like I think a senior director of sales, and then like after 3 years, he's like a chief commercial officer now, and
That's so
so that's,
cool.
I mean, I'm happy when people join my program that as a result of it, or a byproduct of it, is that they make more money. I think
Yep.
that's kind of kind of the hope.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What a really cool thing to see everybody going through that, and and leveraging it. And what you were talking there about, sort of, your personal brand online and LinkedIn. We talk about personal branding a lot, and how it's that feeling you leave in the room. And if you start to culture it online, then it's that feeling that's always there, around. And as you said, I've seen so many professionals in the industry that they start to be, just a bit more loud with their voice, the places they go, the things they do. And as if it's authentic, it really resonates with people. And being in talent attraction, those are the people that go, I've been seeing this guy or this girl on LinkedIn. I'd like to know a little bit more about them, and then sends off all the headhunters. So very, very true story. And I think that's absolutely amazing that you're able to give these skills to the reps at the moment, because one of the things is, I don't really think it's being taught within the organizations as much as it could be. I've only been out of consulting for MedTech for about a year now, but at that time we were, a couple years post COVID, and there wasn't any sort of learning and enablement coming through the door that was going to talk to them about their building an online presence and using these channels to gain access. So I definitely think that it's necessary, because the way what got them there got them here is not going to get them there,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally.
So let's talk trends as well, the state of medtech. So, what do you think is the tone and temperature of the industry right now? What do you think are the, next things, and what's going to make the biggest impact?
Yeah, I think we are in an election year in the U.S., and so usually during those times, funding is always going to be a little bit more difficult. I think it's going to be. It's so far, it seems like it's been a little bit better than last year, but with inflation, money's expensive, and so funding has been tough for a lot of companies. A lot of companies are looking at different avenues to raise money, beyond just like traditional venture capital, like looking at private equity, looking at family offices, etc. That's at least on the funding side. In terms of like M&A activity, I mean, we had Shockwave get acquired this year for $13 billion by J&J, Axonics towards the end of last year. And so M&A, I think activity is starting to heat up, which is exciting and good to see. But in terms of like technology trends, last year there was the specialties that received probably the most amount of funding were in the neurospace slash imaging, and then also orthopedics. But I think some other spaces that are starting to grow a lot in terms of interest in funding is like the cardiac and structural heart space, for example. The area that's kind of gotten like really a little bit decimated, but it still has a lot of potential, is like digital health. I think 2021, there was a big boom in SaaS, and so A lot of software companies, including digital health companies, got a lot of funding, and then the returns weren't exactly there. And so I think digital health is under a lot more scrutiny than it usually is.
Oh, interesting. Well, look, thank you for that. And do you think how is that going to trickle down to the reps that, that you aim to help, and as these things change?
Yeah, I mean, look, as a rep, at the end of the day, when you're evaluating companies, like you should be, thinking about the products and whether they are a must-have or a nice-to-have for a hospital, and then also in terms of what's the pathway for revenue for a hospital. And so I always tell reps like, okay, like there could be a really cool technology that you want to go take on, but you should get a very clear understanding of like, well, how does a hospital make money? Is there a pathway for reimbursement for these kind of things? Because
Yeah.
if the answer is no, it's just really, really difficult. And for reps who have like Me Too products, good luck. That's really hard. But again, like if you're a rep who has like a Me Too product, I don't want to mention any specific products, but like if that's the case, then it's even more important for you to find some sort of way to develop your brand and
Yes.
differentiate yourself.
I was just going
You
to say
know,
that. Yeah.
um, but yeah, I mean, so healthcare is a really tough industry to be in. I mean, I have a friend who's a distributor, and out of the blue, the hospital decided to change contracts, and that was like $1 million in revenue for his distributorship, right? Like, so that stuff is real and happens. At the same time, I think it's an exciting time to be in healthcare. And the reason why is if you look at these mega companies like Google, Amazon, I'm blank. Microsoft's there you go. I can, all these huge companies that are publicly traded. Like they have a fiduciary responsibility to continue to grow. Apple isn't going to wake up one day and be like, "Hey, let's like go into the furniture business." They got to find things that are going to be like sizable bets, and so everybody's looking at healthcare, which in the United States, we spend 20 to 21% of our GDP on it. Um, and healthcare isn't like one multi-trillion-dollar industry. It's a bunch of smaller billion-dollar industries all lumped together. And so I think the opportunity to be in healthcare is great because now you have a lot of people in tech coming in. There's people who are not used to the space are coming into it. And so that's, I think we're in an opportunity where a lot of reps have opportunities to kind of grow into, including, if you look at the software industry, SaaS companies are getting a lot of strict guidance from investors that like they have to sell to industries outside of SaaS. So a lot of these SaaS vendors you see that compete against each other, they sell to each other because SaaS companies, it's very easy for a SaaS company to adopt a new tech stack because like the margin's so high. But what they want is for them to go and get traction in more traditional industries like financial services, like investment banking, and life sciences. And so there's a lot of these companies like Salesforce is a great example who are hiring ex medical device people like reps, directors, etc., because they need somebody who understands the industry specific language and try and sell in those industries. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities, and that's part of the reason why like I set up a business in this space. I could have gone into anything I wanted really, but
Yeah.
I chose to stay here for a reason.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think even though it's probably not the biggest time for growth in that sense, and what you can
But we
and
have
have seen, there's so much to be optimistic about. And one of the things that you said struck with me where, when I had started this podcast, I think I shared this stat with you that in Australia, MedTech had actually moved into the second most attractive industry. So there's a
what was
survey.
number one?
Technology. So, I mean, they're still pretty
But it's
close, right?
if you look at like Jonathan Norris, who's the managing director over at HSBC Bank, they put out a great report. The big thing about MedTech is that it's steady Eddie. It's not, you're not going to see hyper growth in our industry, but it's like steady, like reliable growth. Like, and that's one thing I would say is like for a lot of like exciting SaaS companies, you know, some companies can decide, hey, we're eliminating costs and they're just going to get rid of tech stacks. People aren't going to stop needing medical care, and so that's why I think there's still opportunity here. And I mean, personally, like I'm really proud of the industry because like what we do impacts like actual human life, and well-being, right? So like, I mean, who cares if like, like if Salesforce, goes away tomorrow? Like, I mean, will it suck? Like, I guess, but nobody's gonna die as a result of it. But like, if you take, I don't want to mention a MedTech company, a big one, but like any of the big ones, and they just, all their products disappear, like, patients are gonna suffer,
Yeah. Yeah.
so.
100%. And that's that purpose that I think gives commercially minded people like yourself and, even me. If there wasn't some commercial spirit in it, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed as much. But the fact that I can combine that and also still live in purpose and feel like I'm helping others while doing the things that I find enjoyable, that's like the winning combination. So we're really lucky with purpose in this industry, that's for sure. And, I think about with this steadiness, this is why your brand is so important, because in medtech, in healthcare, it's an institution. It's always going to need to be there. So therefore, the way you represent yourself, your personal brand, it is the infinite game. I don't know if you're a fan of Simon Sinek, but even in my day job now, I've moved away from med tech to actually helping doctors in their careers. And I'm constantly coaching our own team to say, they're always going to be doctors. You can take your time. And in fact, don't rush it, because if you rush it, they're going to run the other way. You have to go slow and steady. And you can only go faster by doing the activities that you were talking about, is presenting value. That the only way they're going to turn around and be attracted to you is that there's some value that you represent. Hopefully that's around the product and the service that you're selling, but it could even just be the value of who you are, your personality, how you operate, and how responsive you are, whatever those
Yeah.
things are. But it's infinite. It's going to go on. So treat it carefully.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, look, like, and I'll remember the name of the guy, but like, that what you're discussing is like finite games versus infinite games. There's a
Yeah.
book on that. Literally, I think it's called Finite and Infinite Games. I'll
Is
remember the
that
author.
Simon Sinek as well, or did he
No, no,
borrow
no,
that?
that's
Yeah.
borrowed. But I think a lot of things that Simon Sinek has been borrowed.
Oh.
He's a good author, by the way. No, no,
Yeah.
no, not
Nothing
throwing
new in
shade,
this world,
not
right?
throwing shade on him. Yeah, no. There's very little that's new under the sun, as you say. But no, like, yeah, I think like you, again, as a rep, the one thing I tell reps that they have to be really good at, I think every business professional, is you have to be a learning machine. And so, for example, like when I was a rep, actually, I mean, forget about when I was a rep. Currently when I engage companies and we help them build pipeline, like some of it I have to take calls and meetings with doctors. And so even in those calls, like let's say it's like going in front of a value analysis committee, right? So a lot of doctors have gone through them, right? But like for me, what I try and do is I try and do it, make it a process that's very enjoyable for the doctor. So I'm very big on persuasion, and so I tell the doctor, hey, like we're gonna go through a strategy for the value analysis committee. I'm gonna teach you some basics on persuasion, and now they're like, thinking about it like, oh, like what cognitive biases does each of these people have, etc. Because a lot of physicians are not trained in this stuff. And so even that little process, if you're able to make it a little bit more enjoyable, more relatable, it's better. And I think like part of the reason why I was successful when I had to try and build commercial pipeline and sell was that through my content, I was interesting, I was able to get attention, and then through my discussions with doctors, as many people will know, physicians have a history of like continuing education, so they learn everything outside their practice as well. And so when you sit down and have a conversation with a doctor, I tell people, I'm like, look, like you can't always be about your product. Like you have to be well read, you have to have opinions, like you have to have some interesting, things to talk about. Like, it's almost like I tell people you should be a Renaissance man or a Renaissance woman because, when you're talking to the chair of surgery, you can't just talk about your product all the time. You got to talk about other things, and through those other conversations, you have to demonstrate that you're a perfect person of high value, person of interest, and person of authority.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100%. I mean, but that's, um, I think because of the complexity of the job and the work that's getting done in med tech, as you said, the complexity of the problem is in correlation to your pay, but it just means it's a bit more challenging. You're dealing with sophisticated buyers well educated, well read, as you pointed out, but also really cautious. And so for you to actually create a connection where they think you're not trying to influence them or coerce them, and then also back it up with your data and the why, and actually why this is unique and etc. It's just, yeah, it's a nuanced challenge, which requires your ability to kind of weave your way through the conversation. So influencing and understanding the psychology of that is critical, and not in like a, we're trying to like voodoo you or anything.
No, yeah, no, my biggest criticism of our industry is that I don't think people, and this is like not just salespeople, it's marketing people, there's a lot of people in our space, they do not spend time. Like the one thing that you'll see in physicians is that they have a culture around continuing education. Our industry doesn't have that, and I'm not sure why. And so I always tell people, like, I think Warren Buffett said it, or Charlie Munger, which is like, the more you learn, the more you earn. And so become a learning machine, and I mean, even when you talk to certain reps, if they're trying to talk to a certain prospect, I ask them, like, okay, what do you know about that person? Have you looked their websites up? Have you looked their social medias? Have you looked at their publications? Have you looked at things that, like all this different stuff? And the answer is no. And I'm like, well, no shit that you haven't been able to,
Yeah.
persuade this person or get a meeting with them. Why would they take a meeting with you?
Yep. Yeah,
You know?
100%. It's all there for you. Like we go and put all this information out there, and then
And
as a sales rep, you don't read it. It's like, oh, you could profile them.
yeah, and like, look, like people are just so, they're in our space, sometimes, especially some of these reps, they're so lazy. It really frustrates me. And this is where I think, again, like, let's kind of bring things back full circle. Like, what's the importance of a mentor? The reason why mentorship is important is you need somebody to call you out on your BS. You need somebody to hold your hand to the fire, and through the process. That's why they're called growing pains. It's supposed to be painful. Force you to look hard in the mirror and say, I am not who I could be, you know? So, like, there's this old saying, like, the biggest, like, the worst thing that can happen, or the biggest fear, is like, for me as a man, I die as the man that I am, and then I meet the man that I could have been. Like, that's the biggest fear, right? And so I think people need to demand more of themselves, you know, and find ways, like, find ways to be creative and to enhance their skill set. So I'll give you a great example. I'll give you a great, and so through, I'll back up for a second. On the topic of mentorship, mentors don't just appear magically. By the way, do you mind if I go on this tangent for a
No,
second?
I'm here for it because I've got questions around this. I love to
Okay.
find out how you find mentors, because you're right. They just don't magically appear.
Yeah. So let me touch on. So I'm not a big fan of a lot of things that Jack Welch did in terms of his leadership style, but the guy was he was a brilliant man in terms of how he built GE to what it was, back in the day. And one of the things Jack Welch said is, like, mentors are BS. He was on stage. He's like, mentors are BS. He's like, what if you get a mentor, you don't like them? And his point was, like, everything should be a mentor. And so when I heard that, I was like, in my 20s, I was like, everything should be a mentor. So I was like, you know what? Not just the people that I'm talking to. I was like, what about, like, the great people of the past who are dead, right? Like, I'll never forget, like, I bought Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, wrote his autobiography on his deathbed. It's a $5 book. You know how many people have read that book? Very, very few. And so I constantly look to mentors in the past and get mentorship from everywhere. I get it from books. I get it online. I try and get it from people that I don't like. Sometimes, like, your own enemies are
Oh
actually,
my gosh.
your
Yes.
tormentors can be your mentors, because they
Huge.
can teach you something if you choose to look for it, right? And reframe it. And I would say, like, there's certain levels to being a great student or mentee. And I think at the highest level, right, the greatest students can take even bad education from bad teachers and turn it into something of value. Too many people have this mindset of, like, oh, well, this program or this book or this thing may have worked for other people, but I'm like a unique little snowflake. It's not going to work for me, and so that's one side of it. In terms of finding mentors, and I can say, like, I have some, like, I don't want to name drop, but like, just think about some of the biggest names in our industries. Some of those people are mentors of mine. How did I get them? Part of it is because mentorship is a two-way street, right? Like, I provide value to my mentors in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes at the very bare minimum is that they get joy out of mentoring you because they know, hey, when I give Omar Khateeb some advice, he 9 out of 10 times, like, he will not only take it to heart, but he'll take action on it and then report back like, hey, I did what you advised me to do, and this. And that's the other thing, is that you have to figure out, like, what mentors are good for what. Some of my mentors, I talk to them specifically about a certain part of my business. I don't involve them in other parts because I'm like, that's not their skill set, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And again, this is where LinkedIn can be really, really valuable, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you get to see, and well, I think one of the things that stands out to me when you say that is, just, accepting that the world is your classroom and that there's lessons to be learned everywhere. And whether you put, the mentor hat on it or otherwise, there's learns every single where you go and with every individual that you work with. And I loved what you pointed out, that some of your most challenging interactions, those can be mentoring as well.
Absolutely.
I've learned the most from some of my most challenging business engagements or contacts or relationships. And in the moment, and I've been on the phone crying to my mentor, and her going, "You know what? You're going to turn around and thank this person for this later on. Not today, but you're going to thank them later on." And once you get to that point where you recognize, "Gosh, this whole world is my classroom. There's lessons for me everywhere," then you're into a growth mindset. So we get a choice, right? Which way do we want to go? And that's what you've just said to me. That's how I take it on.
Yeah, and like, look, I'll give you a great example. Chris Prentice, who's the CEO of Mazor Robotics Inc. When I was working for Mazor, he wasn't exactly a mentor because he was like my boss. So it was a little bit different. And I started doing something when I would leave organizations to start with Mazor. So when I left Mazor, I went to Prentice, and I remember how like deeply afraid and uncomfortable I was about the thing I was going to ask him. So I sat down with him in my sort of exit interview, and I said, "Hey, Prentice," I was like, "I got a question." I was like, "Could you pretend for a moment that, like, I'm somebody you deeply care about, like a nephew or a son? What's something that I'm good at, but more importantly, what's something that I'm not doing or something that I'm bad at that is cause for concern for you?" And that,
What a
I think,
great
yeah.
question. And I love how you set it up with, "I'm someone you care about." Think of,
Yeah, the framing is
oh,
everything.
amazing.
Framing is everything. And so now, so he gave me really painful advice. And I'll tell you exactly what he said. On one side, he said, "Look," he's like, "one of your strengths is that you're really good at coming up with very creative ways to solve things and ideas." He said, "The thing that you need to change is that you do not take enough action. Nobody cares about ideas. Nobody cares about this." He like really ripped into me. He's like, "This is what I've been trying to teach you from day one here about blocking and tackling." He's like, "It's about taking action." And so when I left, that was like burned in my brain. Take action. And so I took massive action. Any idea I had for the next, like, up until now, even, I just took action on over and over and over again. And through these actions, which some of them, a good amount of them were public, he observed this. And over time, just to kind of have a, like, sort of a nice ending to the story, not only did we grow closer, because back then, like, we weren't close. I did a lot of things that pissed him off. Let's just leave it at that. Okay. Um, but he is somebody who's come to me on his own as a CEO, and now he's a chief commercial officer at a really cool robotics company. Come to me for advice. And I'll tell you, like, that is like the greatest feeling accomplishment, which is somebody who is a boss of yours, who you look up to and everything, and that you did enough as a professional, and that you grow into a point where now they're coming to you for advice, right? So,
Great
but
story.
all that happens when you put yourself in positions to, again, feel the pressure of growth and really have hard conversations and be very good at self evaluation, you know? And that doesn't mean beat yourself up, right? But it's kind of like, hey, here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses, here's what I got to get better at, and just having radically, like, I'll give you one last thing. Sorry, because
That's all right.
that's why I came on this podcast, because this topic of mentorship. Like I said, look for
Yes.
mentors everywhere.
Yep.
When I was at LSI, there was a investor who I met with, right? And really, really sharp guy. And the guy's like, I think he's my age. He might be even younger than me. That doesn't really matter, right? The reason why I mention that is that most time when professionals meet other professionals their age or younger, they put on like a facade. They're too proud to show that they don't know anything. And I
Yes.
remember when he was talking to me and asked me a question about something, and I very directly I said, "Hey, I just want to be honest with you. I don't know anything about that. That I think we're talking about some specific area of like venture and investing. I was like, I don't know anything in there, so like I just want to like listen to you." And when we talked, all I did was like ask questions, and I admittedly said like, "Look, I don't even know." Like he would tell me something, he's like, "You know what I mean?" And I would say, I really don't actually." And I remember a few hours later, one of my good friends, Henry Peck, who's the VP of growth, I think he's been promoted again at LSI, came to me. He's like, yeah, he's like, I was talking to so and so, and they said like they spoke so highly of you, and said that like anything you would ever need, like they're so happy to help. I'm like, why? And he said, dude, he said that he's like, I talk to people inside and outside of this conference, and a lot of people put on a front and everything. Omar was the only person who's like very genuine and honest, and the fact that he admitted things that he just didn't know gained a lot of respect. And I think there's a lot of power in telling somebody like, I don't know what that means, I don't know about that, right? There's a lot of power and confidence that comes with that versus trying to put up a front and act like you know something, which I see through immediately when I talk to people, because I run a podcast for them.
Yeah. That's it.
Podcast is the hobby, the agency is the living.
That's right. That's right. No, you've got a meter for it. But I think, the way that you're able to be comfortable being vulnerable and saying, hey, I don't know that, is because you have the confidence and trust in yourself to know if you need to know it, you'll go figure it out. By the feedback loop that you got from the your boss from Mazor, right? That hard but really valuable gift that he gave you, that has helped you build that confidence and trust in yourself to know, actually, that was the old me. I do take action. I've got all these examples, which is why, you're really comfortable being vulnerable and saying, what you don't know, because you'll go figure it out. And I think that we should all be more comfortable with that vulnerability, because as you said, people can spot it a mile away.
Yeah,
It's okay to say you don't know, but
and I think
also back yourself up to go figure it out.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is like, if there's a skill set I tell people that's really valuable to have, especially as a marketer, is to reduce like the more willing you are to embarrass yourself, the more successful I think you'll be. Because you're gonna be more willing to be vulnerable, you're gonna be more willing to try new things, more willing to like try things again when they fail. And I think like a lot of this is essentially ego death. We all have an ego. There's no such thing as like completely eliminating your ego, and you're kind of stupid not to understand what your ego needs,
Yeah.
right? But there's a way to sort of like temper that down a bit, and then understand like, oh, like I can be, like I can do certain things. I don't have to put this pressure on myself, right? And I think like when you treat your professional life and personal life like a constant journey of growth and learning, like, look, I'm a
Yes.
dad, right? So I spend a lot of time like reading books on parenting. I try and talk to people who are parents who I respect a lot, right? I like there's no part of my life like I can't think of any part of my life where I don't actively seek more education, more mentorship and advice. It's just non-existent to me, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, it's a great way to live, as long as you're comfortable with your pace, I think. I think that's where maybe someone listening to this might find it hard to be on like that all the time, and they don't actually recognize that there would be seasonality to what you do and how you do it, but the fact is you're always choosing to expand. You're always choosing to grow. Side note on the kids' books, by the way, have those not enriched your people skills when
Oh
you're
yeah, no, totally. Kids, yeah, you'll be surprised how much you learn from children's books.
Oh my gosh. If you haven't, check out The Whole Brain Child. That one really did it for me between the upstairs and downstairs brain. And yeah, that one was a good
Oh
one.
God, I'm getting that.
Yeah. Well, suffice to say, I love what you've shared about mentors coming from everywhere, and taking a little bit further, just recognizing that the classroom is all around you. And to do that, you need to practice your own self awareness. If you're not aware of what's going on, you're going to miss the lessons that are being served to you. I absolutely love the reframe that you did on that question to when you did your exit interview. I haven't heard that before, and I'm definitely going to use that because I think it just really puts you in a position of real authentic care. I mean, I always like to think of that in leadership, that you shouldn't be leading people you don't care about. So that just really kind of snaps it right back to that. And I don't know, you might have covered your best story or piece of advice from a mentor. If you haven't, please feel to drop it in.
I can. I know we're getting close to time here, but like, I can come up with one more. Would you? I'm gonna let you. This is kind of a pick your own adventure. Do you want me to give you one more story from a mentor, or do you have another question you want me to kind of talk
No,
about?
like that's really the last of it. So I'll pick my own adventure. Drop some more wisdom on me, Omar.
All right. So I think in terms of okay, I'm trying to go back and think about some of the more painful things that were told to me that changed me for the better. What Prentice told me was definitely one of them.
Do you perhaps have a mentoring fail that you'd share where you like that did not go the way I thought it would?
Mentoring fail. Like
I oh
where
sorry.
I mentored somebody or somebody mentored me and I was like, that wasn't.
Either or. We did a little bit of a live session a couple of weeks ago with Patrick, and it was funny, the questions that were coming from the group, and these were sort of early on in their career, but it was just sort of, even the basics of approaching a mentor and how do I do this and what do I say, and just all of the little things that, and they shared stories of how it had gone wrong. So I guess that's where I was coming from with.
Yeah, I I can't think of one because I mean, I've been an active mentee for over 10 years now and I think that like very very quickly what I set my sights really high when it comes to mentorship. So again, like I don't want to name drop it like some really heavyweight people in our industry. There's some like borderline famous people that that I consider mentors. And so when somebody gives me advice, like I try to immediately take action on it. But at the same time, I'm very careful about considering who I'm asking the advice from. Because my thing is like if somebody's gonna spend time thinking about a problem that I have and providing a solution, I need to take action on it. That being said, so there's I'm very specific about what I ask to which specific mentor. That's number one, and then number two is like once they give me the advice, like I have to be ready to take action on that advice.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
and if not, have a really damn good reason why, and at least like talk it out with them. The last thing you want to do is like get advice from somebody on what you should do, and you say like, oh yeah, okay, and then you
Don't
don't
do it.
report back, because then when
Yeah.
you run into them, what are you going to say? Like, oh, I didn't take your advice. So usually if I'm not going to take someone's advice, I'll tell them right then and there. I'm like, I don't think I'm going to do that. Here's a reason why.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's okay to have that kind of dialogue. I think the other side of it is like, I'll give a great example of like, not a mentoring, but like advice on how do you find great mentors is it's again, part of this is having the courage to ask something like this, but very powerful, influential people rarely get asked what they need. And so I'm not going to mention the person's name, but there is an investor in our industry who is not a billionaire, but maybe close. I don't know. somewhere in that range. So it's okay. So that now you get an idea of the level of person we're talking about. Somebody that like they got everything, they got all the connections they need, everything. And so when I was talking to him, I mentioned like, hey, like you always actively help me, and I know that you're well connected. You don't need my help. I said, but can we pretend for a moment? And this is a grown man I'm talking to, and I was like, can we pretend for a moment that like, let's say I'm a magical genie. What
I
three
love the
wishes do you
reframe
wish
so
to come
much.
true? Yeah. I was like,
These are
and so sometimes being like having the confidence to play like this is interesting. I was like, look, can we just play a game like I'm a magic genie. Like, what three wishes do you wish to come true? And the reason why I'm saying is that maybe I can help with some of those things, but if not, at the very least, I want to know what they are because maybe I know of some way of solving it. Like, you never know. And so the guy actually, and I to this day I'm surprised. He has a slide deck of like his 10-year plan of what he wants to accomplish, like personally, professionally, everything. And he like emails this. He obviously he's like, don't share this with anybody. He's like, he emails it to me. And he's like, well, this is like my thing. And he's like, if you're interested, maybe you can fill it out yourself for your own self. And so as I'm reading this, then I'm like, oh wait, like this guy's interested in like living as long as possible, like me. So I text him like, hey, actually, have the same interest. Like I have like some resources we could share. So I think like when somebody asks for mentorship, like, or when somebody's mentoring you, like, don't be afraid to ask them, like, hey, look, like, my promise to you, like, what I would do is like, schedule a session, say, hey, look, I got three problems. I want to present each problem to you. I want to talk about it, and then I want to deliver a solution. Or you're going to tell me what I should do to solve each of these three problems, and maybe in a month I can report back to you. Is that okay? They'll say fine. At the end of it, just say, hey, like, just I really want to know, like, is there anything that you're trying to solve for right now? Like, if there's and just admit right there, like, hey, I probably can't help you with anything, but I still want to know, like, what's top of your mind, like, what's important to you, and you'll never know what they're gonna say, you
Yep.
know.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It is a two-way street though. People forget that. They think, "Oh, just because they're the mentor and I'm the mentee that this door only swings one way." I have a mentor that I was working with that they were getting some really great experience out of having these conversations with me. It was a dynamic, it was a situation that they actually hadn't mentored someone under and around. And so I think that, being able to recognize that they get something as well, but then ask them how you can help is really powerful. Yeah. And I love, gosh, a 10-year PowerPoint. Wow. That
Yeah, it
is
was really wild.
yeah, I mean, I like to do a bit of planning, but that's next level. That's fantastic. I think I'm gonna have to work on that. Now, do you have a 10-year PowerPoint plan now, Omar?
I'm working on it. Yeah, because I'm kind of big on like building my life as I go. So I
Yeah,
do have some like long term goals, but as I grow older and I get more input, more qualitative and quantitative data. Like what I think is important actually changes. So now that I'm so like 10 years ago, what I thought was important was become a surgeon. That changed for the better. 5 years ago, I wanted to be, like a C-suite exec. That changed, and so, I'm very flexible around my goals and changing them. I think the end goal is freedom, and I kind of
great.
like live,
Yeah.
I get to live that as much as I possibly can these days. I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's an iterative process. And I think that when you focus on the feeling that you want to experience, like freedom, like joy or connectivity, you're able to find yourself living it before you actually maybe have had that particular description around it, right? Like CEO, like whatever. I find that when I really focus on the freedom, or sorry, on the feeling that I am already living it, and then that obviously feels quite successful. So
That's exactly right. And just to kind of like wrap things up, like the one thing I would tell your audience is like, I think the more that they start to learn about themselves, the more they learn about the world around them, and then anything is possible. And so that starts by understanding the difference between your intuition and ego. And I think I would encourage your audience to do more research on that. One book I can recommend is Living in the Light by Shakti Gawan, which is kind of a hippie book, but it's actually very powerful. on understanding what's the difference between your intuition and ego, because there's so many things that we think we want, but it's really what other people want, and we've kind of taken and packaged it as part of our ego, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's a great call out. I was actually going to ask you about a book. So thank you for that. Now, we want to make sure that we can also help you, Omar. So, you've been so generous with your time. And I know that you've created something that is really a piece of technology that enables the practices, the actions that you think MedTech reps and really any professional on LinkedIn should be taking. And that's Omni Creator. So, do you want us just to give us a quick, like, real quick spin on
yeah,
that and also let them know what our listener, the special offer that they have?
yeah, totally. So I'm a SaaS founder, and so my co-founder Daigo and I um, founded Omni Creator, which is the whole idea is that, whether you're a small business owner or a sales rep or whatever, being a thought leader on LinkedIn in some way or capacity is going to be huge value to you. More importantly, it's going to give you leverage. And so what Omni Creator is that it is a software platform that allows you to use AI to create content, so you can create your content, schedule it, all your files, your videos, images, etc. are all stored on there. So it makes it really easy to recycle and reuse content. You can connect your company page and manage it through there. But the thing that makes it very different, it's the only platform of its kind at all, is that we built it around a creator community. So once you get in there and start scheduling your content and everything, we found that what helps people grow their audience is obviously having other people engage with their content. So once you're in there, there's a creator community. And right now, our big focus is MedTech, where once you post and use the tool, we have a little news feed where other creators who use Omni Creator can see your content and then they go and engage. And it's really cool to see the community do that, and we focus on small micro communities. So you'll only see a few people at a time on that newsfeed. So that way it's a little bit more personalized versus like knowing that your content goes up on a newsfeed with hundreds of other people or thousands. Like, doesn't make sense. And so for your audience, they can check it out and get a free trial of it. It's only $20 a month, but they can get it for free for 30 days and see how it works. They just go to omnicreator.club. That's OMNICREATOR.club, and they can use the code podcast, and then they'll be able to use Omni Creator free for 30 days and see how they like it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. That sounds really exciting. We'll have to check it out. And so that's for 30 days on Omni Creator, and that's the code podcast.
That's as simple as that. OmniCreator.club, and just put in the invite code podcast and connect your LinkedIn. And what I highly recommend though is that once you do it, like, it can be something simple, but just start scheduling some posts right away so you can see the value of the platform, the data, and everything.
Yeah, fantastic. So it gives you all that back end analytics as well, which is
Oh yeah,
exciting.
our data dashboards are amazing. It makes, I mean, super easy to use and makes it easy to identify what posts are working, so you can either reuse them or recreate similar posts like them.
Amazing. And I love the communities. I mean, we over here at MedTech Mentor, we like to say it takes a village. It really
I know it
does.
does. It
So,
really does.
and I guess that probably, really sums things up when we talk about, what specific platforms and strategies do you think are the most effective? So, Omni Creator, LinkedIn, scheduling things, engaging with the community. Those are all real tactical takeaways to wrap up this episode. Thank you so much for your time, Omar. It's been a joy, and I absolutely loved some of the things that you shared, the reframes, the feedback, mentoring everywhere. It's been so great. I'm really grateful for you coming on the show.
Absolutely, Crystal. Thanks for having me on. It's been a blast.
Thank